Thank you. And I'm delighted that we're starting off our meeting with our Create Award presented by Lynn King.
Excellence. Tall order. Technology. Summer. Usually higher. Them to get all over. This year, they decided to students. Two level interviewed. They interviewed. They worked very hard and continuously demonstrated our skill. Summer. So that says a lot about two young women. Shelby Decker, two award. Yeah.
Congratulations, and thanks so much for representing Lake George at a high level. It's always such a wonderful way to start off our meeting as a reminder of why we're here for our students. So thank you so much for coming out to be celebrated. Next up on our agenda, we have our CPA, Scott Preuser, who's going to give our annual audited financial statement. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you very much for letting me present today. Before I get started, I just want to talk about the financial statements before we get into all the numbers and everything. Your financial statements were presented fairly in all material respects with generally accepted accounting principles. You had an unmodified opinion. You had no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and no areas of non-compliance. And you had an unmodified extra class report with cash basis. And there was this one recommendation on that one. And that was, there were some clubs that were inactive, financially inactive during the year. And that was it could be because of COVID, or it could be that they were just inactive. So we have the administrators look at them to see if they're going to be active this year. By mid-year, you should know if they're going to be. And if they're not, then it's up to the board if they want to decide. Money would go to either like student council or to yearbook, something that would benefit the whole, student government. So that was the only recommendation that we had. So looking at your financial statements, and I always I think I brought it up last year, is if you look at it and you see, we have page 1, you have a negative net position. That is not a bad thing to have. What it is your financials now, you have to take all your district-wide assets and all your liabilities. And this year you had a negative $46 million net position, but the largest thing is because you have a OPEB number, which is your retiree's health insurance. And now the last couple of years that's been shown there, and that number is over 73 million. So, and there's no offset to that. So if you're someone ever questions you, like, geez, Lake George has a negative net position. I think we do over 30 districts. We only have one that still has a positive net position. Everyone else has a negative net position. And Now, like, it'll just keep going year after year because that actuarial prepared number, OPEB, just keeps increasing each year. So like last year it was 62 million. Now, like I said, it's up to 73. Another item that came up during the year, which you probably wouldn't know looking at the financial statement, was GASB 84, which was fiduciary activities. But there actually was a lot of work done in the district office. What they did is they had to move all the payroll transactions used to be kept in a trusted agency, and they had to move it over back into where it was in the general fund. So like in looking at the financials, you won't really see it, but their work, they had to convert all from one fund to the other. And years ago it was there, and then they decided to move it out there, and then, wisdom will put it back there now. So, so the only thing that looks a little bit different when you look at the financials is page 7 and 8. You show the activity of the extra classroom report. You get a separate one. You have to show the activity and then other activity for if you have custodial or private purpose trust. So that was the only other major change to the report this year. Looking at the district financially, your assets, you had over almost $7.3 million in assets to liabilities of 1.6, and overall fund equity of 5.7. So you look at that, your asset to liability ratio is up to 4.63 to 1. You see an increase from last year. And looking at that, you have a well-balanced reserves and fund balance. And you look at your lister, I could name them all off, you can see on the sheet, but you've set up a lot of reserves, almost 10 of them, that could be used for future things. And especially with the uncertain times that are going on, it's always good to have. Like you had your capital reserve, you used it in the past, which helped, lower borrowing, and it helped on, you didn't have to borrow right away. You've used that in the past. You used a repair reserve. I remember at one board meeting they had the public hearing right before I spoke, and that's been used before. So like a lot of these reserves are good, and they'll come into play in the future. This is, even though right now, things are all right. We have the, federal stimulus money, and that's only a temporary thing. And that's, like I was trying to remind, or when I go speak to the boards, that it's only 1 to 2 years, and we don't know if we're going to get it anymore. Probably not. But so when you're doing, what you're going to use it for, you got to remember that it's only a temporary thing. I have a lot that are doing like HVAC and stuff like that. So it's like, hey, it's something that we wouldn't normally do. I had some that were using it for position stuff, and you got to remember that if you're using it for positions, after that money runs out, the budget has to pick it up. So you have to, keep that in mind. So like I said, looking at your reserves, you have, like I said, you have a lot of almost 10 reserves, and you still have your unassigned fund balance of 4%, which is almost $1 million. How you ended up there? Revenues to expenditures was almost $500,000 surplus. Where you were is your revenues came in over almost $270,000 over what was budgeted. The biggest one was that you got the federal sources, which when you were doing the budget wasn't part of it, and all the districts ended up getting funds to help offset costs that were due to COVID. On the other side, and you look at your budget, how you spent on the expenditure side, you're very, very consistent. The last 3 years, you spent 95%, 93%, 94%. So on that, you're not jumping around like in in the upper 80s and then way up to 99. You keep a steady budget, and that's what we like to see. That each year it's not, you don't have large increases and large fluctuations in what you spend. And a couple areas where you were able to save this past year were central services, the OCAD, pupil service, and transportation. And a lot of those things had to do with kids were in and out of school, depending on your area. Now it'll be a lot different because everybody's back in school, hopefully for the whole duration of the year, and the expenses will be more online. Looking at your a couple more financial items, your cash position is over $6.4 million. So you have money to go forward into the future. A couple more items. Looking at your school lunch fund, you had an operating loss of $51,000 before a transfer of $30,000. So this past year, reduced your fund balance to 16,000. Revenues are up, well, mostly due because you got more reimbursement from the federal government. They're reimbursing at higher rates. But expenses are up too. I think when we were talking to the audit committee, there was new things that are coming up that, yeah, we're getting more money, but the cost, well, and everyone's hearing about inflation, that the cost of everything is going up too. So even though you're getting more funding, and when they were doing the increased rate, they weren't even taking into account where we are now with inflation. So hopefully they might make another adjustment, but probably not till next year. You looked at last year, you had an operating loss of over 90,000, but you transferred 104. But like most of the school lunch programs are like that now. You have to do transfers to cover the costs. Mostly it's to cover the benefits. Years back, you used to have a lot, leeway with what you could sell and stuff, and you could make a lot of profit that way. Now it's, even my schools that were making money after COVID had kind of wiped out most of them, and they had, are making transfers too. So you're in the same boat as, a lot of our other districts too. In your capital fund, you're in your district-wide capital project that was voted on in 2018, so you're in the midst of that. And another positive item is you have almost $500,000 in your debt service, and that can be used for future debt payments of principal interest, and that just has to be used over before the life of the bonds that you have. So you have something, if you need to, you could always transfer that, and then use that to help pay down the debt. Any questions or?
One question from back at the beginning of your presentation with the extra classroom funds.
Yep.
Are you saying that a club has to show evidence of money within a certain time frame?
We have to note it if it doesn't, but like we have a lot now that would put right on the report that they might have activity, but they had no financial activity during the year. So either has to be noted on the, on the extra classroom report, or at least a year-end one. It could say active. Otherwise, we just have to report to the board that it wasn't, wasn't financially active, and then you would
But
have
the
to.
club was, if it's really just like a red flag to say, is this club still active?
Yeah.
So that you can put money elsewhere if you, so like after a year, is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
just
Especially
look
what's
at
going
that.
on. It's like you don't, because we had some that didn't, like last year, well, the last year they didn't have advisors because they really didn't have activities going on. Kids were, coming back, but they didn't have a lot. So that's why it's like usually you would say after a year, but the way things are now, you kind of, look at it a little bit longer.
So a club can be financially active for an indefinite amount of time, but as long as, because they may not have expenditures or money coming in, but they're actually doing things. They're just not moving any money.
Yep.
So they're still allowed to be a club.
Yes.
It's
yep.
just a red flag if there is no in and
Yeah,
out,
we just
to
like,
say, is it- okay.
like a lot, you could just put on the year-end one that it was active, and then, and this way we won't note it to you. This year we've had a lot more because there was a lot of, almost, I think that comment is like on every school we have this year that there was inactive clubs. Usually you don't see it as much, but this year we've had every report I've done so far. Some are a lot more, but.
Any other questions? Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we're very pleased to welcome Jim Dexter, who's going to talk to us a little bit about superintendent search options. Welcome, Jim.
Doug, and I'm going to sit here if that's okay and talk to Doug, and I've got a bunch of materials to go over with you. So good evening, everyone. My name is James Dexter. For those of you who don't know me, I'm privileged to be the district superintendent for Washington, Saratoga, Warren, Hamilton, Essex Supervisory District. And in that role, I have kind of two jobs. One is being the executive officer of the BOCES, and then the other is being the commissioner's representative in the field. And that's why I'm here tonight. And so I work for the state education department in part of my role, and I work for the BOCES in part of my role. And so some of what my job is to work with boards of education to support them, their needs, and to provide assistance as they deem appropriate. And so what I wanted to do tonight is talk a little bit about superintendent searches, obviously not asking you to make any decisions or lock in anything, but kind of understand at least the process from what I usually go through, and then answer a lot of questions that you may have. I will say I'm probably going to go over a lot of things, so I'll do my best to keep it expeditious, but also not to go too fast, because there are a lot of steps to this. But I think the point that I hope to have as an outcome tonight is have an understanding of the options you have and ways that you can move forward, choose to. The one thing I'll just always say is there is no such thing as this is how I do my search or this is how a search happens. It's always the board's search, and the board determines how they want it to happen and what steps they want to include. And I'll kind of skip to bullet number 2 right off the bat, just so in case there are questions. So my role in a search process, and I've done a lot of them, if you call any board I think that I've worked with, I think you'll find that this is the answer, is not the decision maker. It's not my role to make decisions on anything. My role is only support the process so that the steps that need to happen that the board directs, done. As a matter of fact, the last time I was here, and it's not uncommon, I'll step out of the room anytime there's a decision to be made so the board can have discussions in and amongst itself. And I did that last time. And ultimately, it's not my job to judge your decisions. It's my job to support your work and to provide assistance in the way that makes the most sense. So with that in mind, just so you know, by the way, there are 37 district superintendents in New York State. This supervisory district has 31 school districts. It's one of the larger ones as far as number of districts, but you'll see across the state, the district superintendents are often working with boards on any number of matters, including superintendent searches. So any question about my role or what I traditionally try to do? Okay, with that being said, I wanted to kind of give you some options of the types of searches you have available to you. So there are 4 types of searches that make the most sense. You can combine some of these, but you have options. You do not have to do a search in a particular way. So the first search that some boards look for is sometimes they'll do an internal search. Particularly, this happens sometimes in districts where they may have succession planning, or they may be grooming somebody, or they may have somebody in mind. So sometimes boards will say, we want to have an internal search, and we want to post it, and we want to let internal candidates apply. And if an internal candidate applies that meets the standard that we have, that we will not go out to the open unless that candidate or those candidates don't meet our standards or they're not the right fit for us. So most boards don't choose this option, but there are some boards that's the option they want to have. So for example, Warrensburg just did an internal search. Fort Ann just did an internal search because they felt they had candidates that they wanted to take a look at. And they said to their community, we're going to post a job internally first. And depending on what happens, that will make the decision if we go external. So that's one type of option that you have as a board. Not saying that's right for you. I'm just saying that that is one option you have. The other option is you could, sometimes people will combine a headhunting process with an open recruitment, or just keep it headhunting. And what sometimes there are boards out there who sometimes will say, we want to tap people on the shoulder. We want to invite them to be a part of a search. And sometimes that's combined with an open invitation to apply. Other times, some boards in certain parts of the state will say, that's not what we want to do. We want to try to find candidates, bring them in, and have them interview with us So that is an option you have if you wanted to go in that direction. Then there's what's called a confidential search. And sometimes confidential searches are linked with the headhunting search. So confidential searches are a little different in as much as you're telling the candidates that their candidacy would not be known to anyone except the board and some selected individuals you may have to bring as part of the search. And you have the reason some boards do that is they feel they can attract more candidates who might not be willing to tell their board yet that they're looking for another position, or who might be in a position where they want to at least give it a shot and get farther along in the search before it's known that they're a candidate. In certain parts of the state, confidential searches are very common. The capital region, they're very common. Some parts of Long Island, some parts of Westchester, where boards want to do everything they can to get the most candidates. And there's some people who feel, and I think there's some truth to this, that when you are a sitting superintendent, or if you are a spot where you've been successful, not everyone wants to go and say, I'm going to leave, I may leave this job, I'm going to look for another job. And so some boards decide, we're going to keep it confidential. And when you say it's confidential, you're really saying to the candidates, only the people who are on the board and a selected group of individuals that you choose would be aware of who's the candidate. Like everything, there's pluses and minuses. So some of the pluses are that you may get some additional candidates that you might not otherwise get. But some of the minuses are some boards feel the need to have a broader involvement of their community. And if you're telling the candidates that you're not going to release the names, then of course, that wouldn't be possible to the same degree as some of the other types of searches. And then the last type of search you really have available to you is kind of the traditional, we're going to do a brochure, we're going to advertise throughout the state, maybe throughout the nation, and we're going to accept applications. We'll review those applications, we'll decide who search, who we're going to interview, and often it's not unusual for boards to use some group of stakeholders to help out with that process somewhere in the search. And the board, of course, like all decisions, the board ultimately decides on who they want as superintendent. But you do have different options. You can mix and match a few of these things. The one thing I'll just say again about a confidential search is if you do go down that road, you kind of have to stick with that because you're giving candidates know what that means. And they know that if you say it's confidential search, that means their name is not going to be getting out. So I just want to make sure you understood the range of opportunities you have as you develop your search. And I don't know if you have any questions on these 4 options. Lynn. Well, they still have to give their notice, but a lot of times it's not known that they're the applicant until right before they're appointed. So in other words, but that's how that works. So in those cases, the board will come out and say it's our intention to appoint so-and-so, and at that time they'll communicate with the people in their former district, and then they'll give notice. They still have to give notice, and obviously the appointment is public, but the search itself is not.
Do you ever have a confidential to a point until you get to like a final 3 or final 2 candidates, and then it's, at that point, they're letting folks know that they're a finalist?
So we try, even on an open search, we do our best, particularly at the beginning of the search, to maintain confidentiality of the candidates, because we always want people to not have a reason not to apply. And I always suggest to the boards that you keep everything confidential at the beginning because you don't want a disincentive. So you may have some people who say, I'm going to apply, and if I don't get interviewed or I get through the first round and nothing happens, no harm, no foul. So often, kind of what you suggest is kind of the practice of even an open search. But with an open search, the expectation is later on in the search is going to be more of a public disclosure. And if you're open, people should suggest, if you do an open search, people understand and accept that some part of the search that's going to happen. But for the most part, they expect that at the beginning of the search, it would be more confidential. Does that answer your question?
How would you check references? At what
So
point?
that's one of the challenges of a confidential search. And that's where some of the boards will sometimes sacrifice some information. Now, with that being said, there are some things that you can do. So before, traditionally, when I work on with the board with a search, we don't start with actual reference checking right at the beginning, but I try to find out anything I can about a candidate. So the first thing is I have 36 colleagues in the state who do what I do. And so if there's something that the board needs to know, I try to make sure I find it. And of course, we Google and we look, we ask a lot of questions, but behind the scenes. And you have that option with a confidential search, but it does make it more complicated when you get to actual reference checking. Now, sometimes because you're really saying to that candidate, we're not going to call references to the, and you can, as you get a little closer, you can make it known to the candidate that you're going to need to speak to some folks. So there are some avenues to do some of that, but you can't, when it's more open, traditionally you'll follow a lead wherever it goes, and wherever it goes. And you have to be a little bit more, careful if you're doing that, because once again, you're telling the candidates that their candidacy won't be known except for a few folks who they've chosen. So you gain and you sacrifice with every type of search that you have available. Yes, ma'am.
Confidential, you had mentioned that one of the possible downsides to a confidential search was less community involvement, but could you have a lot of community involvement on the front end?
Yep.
In terms of getting a lot of feedback from the stakeholders on what's important to them and just.
Absolutely, and
Okay.
that's a great point. Something that I'll suggest that can be a part of any search process you do, that often in the beginning of the search, and we'll talk about this in a few moments, but you really want to, most boards want to get input from their communities on a couple things. Usually you're looking for information on skills, characteristics, traits that people think that a superintendent should have, and there's different ways to get there. And different methodologies that some boards use to collect that information. But I think whatever type of search you do, most boards want to collect information in the beginning. Not every board has done that. Some boards have said, not many, but there have been boards in this region who've said, we're the board, we're elected, this is what we do, and they haven't involved the public on the front end or later on. But obviously that's a choice you have, so you absolutely can do that.
Okay.
And the other thing is, you can involve some stakeholders in a confidential search, but normally you do ask them to sign confidentiality agreements, which you don't normally do if it's a more of an open type of search. Any other questions on those aspects? Okay, so we'll move quickly to bullet 3, and that's exactly what you were talking about, Katie. Most boards want to have an interaction with the community. And as I've gotten better of this through the years, I always think I've learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, but I've learned a lot through the years, that it's so important to not just hire, but hire for something. And I think time on the front of the search can really pay big dividends in figuring out what you want to hire for. The classic mistake, and it's just human nature, can be, no matter what it is, who the person is, if you're replacing Dr. Huntley, it's easy to start thinking what Dr. Huntley was not and then try to hire for that, right? And so it's just human nature versus what do we need to have for our superintendent of schools, not react to maybe who the person was before or anything else, but kind of what are the skills, characteristics, traits. And I have learned through the years that it's really beneficial to spend time collecting information. There's lots of ways to do it. So some boards, and I put a copy of a draft in your folder, some boards will do online electronic surveys. All of this can be edited, changed, updated, whatever it is you wish to have. For the most part, they tend to be open-ended questions because you don't want to lead people to the answers. And these are very easy to do online, collect data. We can disaggregate by who fills it out, that kind of thing. So here's what we heard from the staff. Here's what we heard from parents. Here's what we heard from community members, et cetera. Some boards like to do community forums. And I listed, I put a couple of the community forum questions we did. You'll see one for Saratoga Springs that we did when they did focus groups. And there's another one for Hudson Falls. Hudson Falls did a community survey first. Then they looked at the data from the community survey. And then they put together the public forum based on what they heard and asked people to prioritize information. And there's lots of ways you can do that. You could have one night where anyone's invited, or in the past, sometimes people have said, we want you to meet with the teachers and do a forum with them. We want to do something with parents and community members. We want you to do something with them. It's really your choice of how you do this. But normally, you'll give us direction on where you want to get, who you want to have spoken to, what type of information you want to collect. Usually, we need a small subgroup or a board member or two who is willing to help us create all the questions and make sure you're comfortable. I'll say this now and I'll say it again later. Nothing ever happens in a superintendent search until the board signed off on it. So it's never Jim Dexter saying, here's your survey. It's the board member working with Jim Dexter to figure out what your survey is. And once you've signed off on it and when it's going to go out and how it's going to happen, what the communication strategy is going to be, only then do those things go out. So what often happens, and I've learned over the years, and I wish I had done this a little bit more the first couple of years, is really trying to develop candidate profiles that are not just a series of bullets, but really define what you're looking for. And there are certain things in some of these draft candidate profiles that I have for you that are similar, because for some part of the job, they are similar. You need people who have skills. But if you read these two, I put in Minerva and Hudson Falls. If you read these two, they're different in what they're looking for in a superintendent. Both were based on what they heard from their communities, but also what the skills needed. So for example, Hudson Falls needed a systems leader because they have a lot of people who work with them, support their work. They needed somebody who knew how to work, delegate, hold people accountable. And also there were things that were important to Hudson Falls that were very unique in here about interaction with the community, those type of things. If you read it, it kind of screams what they were looking for. Minerva, they were looking for a person who not only was, they weren't looking for a systems leader necessarily. There's one principal, 100 and something kids. They were looking for somebody who doesn't mind mopping the floor, somebody who can write the consolidated grant, somebody who can drive a bus, somebody who can lead instruction, somebody who can pinch hit in any number of categories. And it gets a little more complex than that, of course. But when you look at these, and the goal would be after you get, if you decide to go down that road, the goal is to come up with a candidate profile that matches what you're looking for. Because the most important thing you want is a candidate who can be successful here. And the more they know about your district and the more that you know about what you're looking for, the better it is and the easier it is for you to rate candidates. What we'll often do is take your candidate profile and then turn that into a rating rubric sheet with all the important terms so that everyone's rating the candidates against the same criteria, and that's the criteria that you've developed. And if you involve community members, stakeholders, staff, et cetera, we recommend to the boards using the same criteria. So every group that looks at those candidates are looking at those same criteria. So that is often, usually the thing that the boards will say to me is, yeah, we want to have a strategy for getting information. What typically happens is they'll say, we want you to do a survey or want you to do forums. Sometimes the board members will facilitate the forum. So for example, I'm out in Salem and the board said, if you could bring some writers, we want each run a table and we're going to ask the same questions as board members. We want to be there. Can you bring people who might be able to take notes? And we're going to put together a series of questions that we want our community or staff or faculty to answer. And And then they're also doing a community survey, and then we'll bring that data and we'll return to the board in a public presentation, and we'll actually show you the disaggregated data, what you heard. And then we'll look to the board to get some feedback on what we usually draft up for the profiles, and we'll send it to you and ask you to kind of tear it apart and see if we got it right. And we edit it until you say, that's it, that's the person we want. You know, like I said, if you look at some of the bottom bullets, they're pretty consistent between year to year. But if you look at what's on the top, they are unique to the district and what the board was looking for. So to your point, what you said brought up earlier, I think community involvement can be really helpful, but that's ultimately the board's decision. My recommendation, no matter how you wish to proceed, I've learned over the years, spending that quality time up front really makes a huge difference, because you're hiring for something, you're not just hiring someone. Makes sense. Okay, so we'll move on to, my glasses are fogging, I apologize. So what I listed here is just those things: online survey or focus groups. Those are some of the ways that boards often will try to collect information. The next thing is there are some important policy decisions you do have to make as a board. And I do have data at some point I can help with this, but district residency is always an important policy that a board has to make. And as you can imagine, there's pros and cons to that. A pro of having a residency clause is that individual lives in the district, and you can imagine all the positives that go along with that. The con, of course, is often when you do invoke residency, sometimes have candidates who are left, who will not choose to apply for the position because they might live 25 miles away, or they might live 30 miles away, and that can affect your candidate pool. Obviously, we live in a day where most times both spouses work, and often people live in a radius that, you know, is somewhere in between where both spouses work or convenient to both. And not everyone's always willing to move their family or sell their house for a 3-year commitment from a board or a 4-year commitment from a board. So, but what I've always said to boards is, if that's what your value is, then that's your value. But you really have to make sure you understand the pluses and the minuses of residency. Normally, we ask the board to be pretty transparent with residency. I think the last thing you'd ever want to do is get to a spot where you've offered somebody a position, and then you say, oh, we want you to live in the district. That, as you can imagine, that usually doesn't go over so well. And there are boards who do that sometimes. And, you know, with that superintendent, it's like, gee, I didn't think I got the real answer, or they weren't upfront and honest with me. And of course, you're always looking for honesty, integrity, in both ways, and obviously a candidate is as well. So I know in the past you did not have residency, but that is a choice you have. And there's different levels of residency. But in fact, if you look at the Hudson Falls, not only do they have to be a resident, but they have to be a full-time primary location resident. In other words, their family has to be there, the whole thing. But that was a choice they made, where other searches, that was not a requirement. So that's one policy decision that the board usually has to know before you put together the search brochure. And the other, salary. And this is always one of those things where it does matter. And I will say it's a very, very competitive market this year. I think in our region, almost a third of the superintendents will be retiring. Some of the districts have plans. It's not quite a third, but it's close. Some districts have plans for people they are promoting from within. As I mentioned, 2 districts just did searches. Both of those, Warrensburg and Fort Anne, are retiring in January. The rest will be next year. And around the state, there's a lot of searches already underway. So it's a very, very competitive market. I can't tell you what to pay. I can certainly bring some data at a later time and show you what some of the data is by the BOCES and by Warren County. But I would suggest that the market is going up a little bit, and some of the districts I've started conversations with are already probably going to offer much more than what the person who was there before was making. but that has to be a value of the Board of Education. It can't be my value. But it does matter to the types of candidates you receive in an application, experience of the candidates you receive in an application, and based on the experience of the candidates and also the number of candidates you're going to receive. If the value of the position is particularly for experience, if you're looking for an experienced superintendent, they're going to say, I'm leaving a job where I'm already making X. What would be the value for me? And that's not the only decision. There's quality of life, quality of the district, all those type of things that somebody will look at. But certainly salary is an important consideration, and that's an important policy decision that the board will have to think through. Went through a lot so far. Any questions? I tend to speak fast sometimes, so trying to avoid that. But I also know your time is valuable. So once the board tells us what they want in a search and you develop your profile, we often put together a search brochure. They tend to be electronic in nature, but we obviously want something for the candidates to look at and to learn a little bit about the district. And so I think there's probably sometimes I'll put like different ones in case you want to compare notes. So you may have either Hudson Falls, you may have Queensbury when Dr. Huntley left, or I don't know if there's any Minervas out there, but you can get a sense of what they look like. And we try to put information about the district and about the community and about the candidate profile. We try to make sure that everything is upfront about residency. If you have a salary range, what that salary range is going to be, and any other information that we would want the candidates to know. Obviously, it's also a nice PR tool, so usually the boards will ask, when you print these, print some extra ones, we want to have them in the offices. But for the candidates, everything's electronic. The applications, the brochures, they're all fillable forms. They submit electronically, but we do sometimes print some hard copies for boards or community members, or if you use an advisory committee as part of the search, that kind of thing, so they can read up. That is usually developed in consultation with your staff. Nothing ever goes out until the board has said it's exactly what we want it to be. So we work with the board, we work with the district to make sure it's representative of what you want. Similarly, we have an application. The application tends to be fairly standard from district to district, except for some districts want to have writing samples, and the writing samples often vary. And certainly this can change, but has most of the information that you would want, of course, which is employment history and background, just all the types of things you would have, their certificates, their employment history. Obviously, we're looking for employment gaps. So when we go through these, we go through pretty carefully, look through the application, see if there's any employment gaps. Or sometimes there's these questions we can't answer, which we need to sometimes contact the candidates and explain, why you might have left somewhere in mid-year or whichever happened. We have a number of background questions. These have been vetted by different school attorneys that represent the districts in this area, including the attorneys that represent this district. And obviously, we look at those pretty carefully. And references, once again, if it's a confidential search, we'd have to spell that out a little different. And writing samples. And often boards want writing samples, not because it is, and yes, they're interested in what somebody may have to say on a candidate, but ultimately, your superintendent's your chief spokesperson, your person writing to the community, you're representing the thoughts and values of the district. And so it's not unusual the board wants to see how they frame a logical sentence, how they write. And I know your first thought was, well, it's a superintendent application. I'm sure every writing sample is a high quality writing sample, and it would be hard to differentiate between one from another. And I'm sorry to say that that's not always the case. And I find board members read these pretty carefully, and it gives you not only a window into how they think, but also their writing sample and how they'd be representing the district. And so often the board will have a few board members or board leadership or somebody who will be responsible, or sometimes boards will do a survey. I put in, we have a series of questions that boards like to ask. You can always edit them, change them, write your own or whatever it is. But for the most part, I have found boards don't really care as much about the question. They might be interested in the topic, but most importantly about how they respond, and that's what they're really looking for. And I will always say that when I do a search, though, everything that is turned in, every piece of paper that's turned in, and every application goes to the Board of Education, because ultimately those are all your decisions, not my decisions. So I always go through, I check the certification, I go through and double check all of the employment history, make sure it's accurate. I try to make sure everything in here is represented as best I can tell is accurate. That's usually not a problem, by the way. Every once in a while it can be, but we verify everything. But every material, whether it's letters, applications, everything that is turned in, given to the board, and plenty of time for you to review and to ultimately you determine who's going to be interviewed as a group. So that's kind of the brochure and the application. Are there any questions about that piece? Moving forward a little bit, the next step that usually happens is the board develops a timeline. And that is another set of tasks that the board would have to spend some quality time putting together. And usually we back that timeline up backwards. So we usually start by saying, when would you like your new superintendent to start? Most times, when it's this time of year, the superintendent is usually asked to start July 1, which is the beginning of the new fiscal and the beginning of the new school year. Obviously, you want your interim to do your graduation ceremonies. You don't want new superintendent traditionally in like the beginning of June. That's not the best time to bring somebody in. But July is often a good time to get out and meet with the community, meet with board members, and kind of, work with your administrative team and putting together a calendar and schedules and all those type of things. But we start from that date, and then we always figure at least 60 days, because most people have to give 60 days notice. Mrs. King earlier talked about notice. Most superintendents have 60 days in their contract that if they are leaving, they have to notify their board. Some have less, some have more, but on average, 60 days is a good measure. And if you put 60 days in your contract, I've been able to find that to work. And then you work backwards to things such as you have to have the appointment of the, is that not working? Thank you. So you back up the steps: appointment, negotiation of a contract, and those things are fairly standard. And then you tell us what you want. So some boards will want an initial interview with a candidate. Some boards then want to send some number of candidates to a community group and then do some type of final interview process. And final interviews look different no matter which district you go to. And we just back it up. And then we put together the schedule based on what you wish to have. And including in that schedule, we'll put development of draft brochure for the board to review, a final approval by the board, and everything is spelled out. And then we usually also work with the clerk and the superintendent for all the behind the scenes work. So where's the interview going to happen? Who's going to make sure that, if there are people who are invited to participate, make sure, everything's done and all the details are accounted for as part of that search. But it's not rocket science. It really just comes down to what are the steps that you're looking for in a search, backing it up from the start date, and making sure that you are available as a board, and hopefully all board members participate in all the interviews or whichever steps you take. So then once we develop the schedule, as part of that schedule, we'll develop a posting. This posting will go to a number of sites to advertise for the job. To this day, probably the best place to advertise a job is the New York State School Boards Association On Board magazine. Everyone still reads the darn thing. It's paper, but everyone reads On Board and everyone looks at the postings. The New York State Council of School Superintendents also has a posting site where if somebody wants to look for a job, we can post it there. And when we post it, people will get notices saying a job has been posted by the Lake George Central School District. And so the electronic mediums are a lot cheaper than the old days where they used to be very expensive to post some of these jobs in the New York Times, Education Week. Sometimes, depending on the job, we sometimes post it with the School Administrators Association of New York State. That's the group that represents most of the principals. So if a principal is looking to get moved from the principalship to a superintendent, they have a pretty good service. And then there are some other ones that you can choose. And we can post on Top Jobs, which is a national search. We can post on Education Week. Usually I work with the board and you identify where you want it to be. Probably the most important one is that it gets emailed. So the day it goes out, I'll email my 36 colleagues and then and they will email their superintendent. So probably, I think the other day I sent 3 out and from other regions of the state. And so there's a pretty good network to get stuff out into people's hands just through email. But I do recommend advertising the job. Not that it will matter as much for Lake George, but all the advertisements we can push through the communication service for the BOCES and can have those aided for you. And there's no extra cost. It's just a way to bring back a little revenue. Once again, the advertising is not that expensive. You know, you're not going to spend more than a couple $1,000s maximum on advertising unless, excuse me, like if you want to put a job in application at Times Union, you know, there's a market value for that. But most boards want to advertise where people look for the jobs in the journals or the places where superintendents go, and those are pretty well known. AASA does have the American Association of School Administrators, which is a national superintendents group. For not a lot of extra money, NISCUS will post it up on AASA. I will say, we don't tend to get a lot of national candidates. And my first question always when there is a candidate who's leaving a retirement system and leaving a job somewhere is why. And sometimes there's really good answers. Sometimes it's, I have been working in this state for a lot of years. I've wanted to come back to New York. I hold New York State certification. This is a great opportunity and I want to come back. A lot of times it's, why are you leaving a state? Why are you leaving a position? And sometimes when you look under the covers, there's reasons why people are looking outside of the state. And if you don't hold New York State certification, it's easier than it used to be for the district leader certificate, but they still have to take their tests. They still have to do some other items. And so yes, there's reciprocity in certain states, but they still have to take their tests and they have to pass certain things. So what I won't be able to say to you, if there's now a state candidate, unless they already hold New York State certification, there's really no avenue to say they immediately qualify for reciprocity. It's a case-by-case, state-by-state determination. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of portability with district leader certificates across the states, similar to pension plans. So that's why you have to ask a lot of questions. But I do think sometimes it is helpful to send those out because sometimes there are people with New York State certification in other states who are looking, and it's not a lot of money. It's a few $100s, and you get the national look at their job as well. Okay. Still firing up here. So the next thing is advisory committees. And this is another topic really for an in-depth conversation with the board about how you want to proceed. But it's not uncommon that boards, not only in the front end, but sometimes during the search, will want to involve some number of stakeholders. And that's really the board's determination on the number of stakeholders. Do you mix them or do you have separate groups? Obviously, most boards feel like, let me back up for a second. Many boards feel that the more sets of eyes they have looking at candidates sometimes can be more helpful to make sure they're getting it right. There's really 3 parts of the superintendent search. Are they qualified? That's not too hard to figure out. Do they have the skill set and experiences that that district needs? And the third part, are they a fit for the community and the district? And so they can help sometimes, particularly with that fit piece. So that's another decision for the board. If I had one recommendation though, is if you do use advisory committees, I always recommend that you actually hear from them directly. And there are ways to structure those conversations in good and meaningful ways. I know there are search consultants out there. They will bring them in. They'll collect forms from the from the advisory committees and they'll hand them to the board. I find, I've never done it that way. Certainly you could, but I find if the community members meet directly with the board, and they're asked to be a part of the search, they want to be able to provide some feedback. And obviously you got to set the parameters because ultimately it's the board's decision. And you'll have lots of information on the candidates that sometimes the advisory committees won't. Obviously, if there is information about a candidate, you can't just go publicly and announce everything but the board knows everything about them. And so I just recommend that if you do use them, try to figure out a meaningful, useful way to involve them in giving feedback directly to the board. I just find it always is well received when you do that.
Is that framed in an executive session?
Yes, yeah, it would have to be framed. I guess legally it doesn't have to. Highly recommended. It is, because obviously you're talking about specific candidates. And reference and background checks. As I mentioned, we start the high-level background checks right from the beginning. My loyalty in this process can't be to the candidates. It has to be to the board and only the board. And so if there's something you need to know about the candidates, I try to make sure you know, but I also try to make sure I'm not doing it in a way that would make you favor one candidate. Obviously, if there's negative things you need to know about a candidate, you need to know those things. On the other hand, I try to be fair, and there are sometimes situations that happen to people that you need to dig down a little bit and learn a little bit more about, and I always want to make sure the board knows all of those details, but I try to make sure that I'm not painting the candidates in a particular fashion when we go through this process, but making sure you're aware of anything that they need to know. And often most of the applications are good, but there is some bad paper out there. There's people who are looking for things that are coming from places, and it's really my job to try to find that in the beginning. Then, depending on what type of search you decide to do, if it's more open, the reference checks get more formal as the process goes on. And I like to, if it's an open search, I like to actually involve the board members and actually doing the reference checks. And we have some suggested questions. As I always say, you can write your own if you want, but most of the questions kind of make sense. And I think it's helpful for board members to talk to board members or board members to talk to superintendents and really get a sense. I know people say a reference check, everyone's always going to say positives, but I haven't found that that's always the case. Sometimes it's how they say it, or sometimes it's, oh my God, this person leaves, I don't know what we're going to do. And then to some people, like, oh, they've done a good job, but we have a lot of people here who do good jobs. And you can get a sense. It's not an exact science, but I would not want to skip that process if it's more of an open search. And like I said, I like to have board members do it directly and report back to your colleagues of what you heard. I just think that's an effective practice. And I find also that other board members from other districts will often be pretty open with other board members from another district. What I will say, though, is if they don't know you're calling, they might not say much, but if they know you're calling, then, often we can get them to talk to you. The next piece is contract development with school attorney. One of the things I try to involve early on in the search, usually during the interview process, is the school attorney to come in and talk about the last superintendent's contract. Some board members, depending on where you have been in a process, know a lot about the superintendent's contract. Some board members don't know a lot. And you do have options. There are certain things in the law. For example, if a new superintendent is appointed, not an interim, but a new superintendent who's appointed can have a minimum of 3 years of a contract, maximum of 5 years. But everything else in that is fairly negotiable. And boards are always trying to weigh, how do we make sure we have an attractive contract where somebody wants to come and somebody wants to stay, but also a contract that meets certain expectations and parameters for what we have, maybe for some of our other employees with health insurance or leave time or those type of things. What I try to do is bring the attorney into the process a little bit early, even before you name the candidate, so they can get some direction from you as if there's anything you want to change, add, or keep the same from the former superintendent's contract. And when you select a candidate, That's really when we hand over the baton. So the search kind of stops and the attorney then begins to work with you. And you can expect that a candidate is going to be, they're going to be represented. I always recommend a candidate to be represented. It's a very important document for you, and it's a very important document for that individual. And the attorneys usually work on behalf of their clients to negotiate the contract. What I don't like to have happen is have that happen and force the board's hand right at the last minute. I think if you've done your upfront homework, yes, there's some things you have to plug in at the end of what the salary is going to be or anything unique to that individual. But if you've done it right, most of that work's done up front, and you're in a position to bargain, and then you have to have your own internal process of how you're going to work with your attorney to get that done. Negotiations with superintendents tend to be cordial. They tend to go well. The biggest problem is always getting the darn attorney's schedules worked out because they're busy. But it is a process you have to be prepared for. They are going to, they negotiate. They're not going to, the one thing about the attorneys who negotiate the contracts, they do have a good sense. They're not going to try to make Lake George pay a salary that they're going to pay for parts of Long Island. But they are going to know what your former superintendent has in their contract, and they are going to know what neighboring superintendents have in their contract. And they're obviously going to represent their client to get the best deal possible. But like I said, it tends to be cordial. And sometimes boards have to say, yes, we'll accept that, but we're not going to accept that. And usually you can get it done in a reasonable amount of time. But I think the thing about that is getting it done up front and making sure that you feel comfortable well before you make the offer of what's in that agreement. I wouldn't want you to ever say, oh my gosh, we're putting that together last second. We really don't know what's in it. That's not fair to the board. And so we try to make sure we have those conversations up front as part of the process. As far as costs for the search. So you already pay a portion of my salary, state does, and some of the other boards do. So there's no cost for however many times that, you be here. There are costs for brochure development. They're not expensive, but there is cost for brochure development. And then there's cost for if you have your advertising, and once again, we do whatever advertising you select, that is just going to be the cost that it is, and you'll get aided on that. And obviously, if you have committees or whichever, and you have cookies and sodas or water and that kind of stuff, obviously that would be a cost to the board. Often I will take care of through the BOCES administrative budget if there are, and because I've done this consistently for all of the boards, if you have a meeting, let's say, and if you have interviews, let's say they start at 5, 6 o'clock, I know board members are coming from work or they're coming from other locations, so I'll arrange working with your staff to have a light dinner here, and that allows board members to get here, have a bite to eat, make sure you're all set for your interviews, your questions, because you'll develop all your own questions in your own format, that you're ready to go. And then everyone's here on time. Obviously, the last thing you want is, people coming in at the last moment and coming in through. So I find and I take care of that. If we have a light dinner here and you have an opportunity to kind of, get here in time, have a bite to eat, so you don't have to worry about rushing home and getting here, that, we're all set to start those interviews. When we interview, I'll back off. I will keep notes of the interview on a high level, but obviously I'm also here to protect the board a little bit to make sure if there are questions, people, it still is an employment interview. You still have to do it constitutionally appropriate. I've never had an issue with that. I've never had a claim against the board, but obviously I am a witness to some degree to obviously to the process. Should there ever be a claim. I've never had one, not even close. But it's just something I try to make sure I keep some notes, particularly if there's anything unusual. So that's, I know we went over a lot of information, but that's kind of the decisions that you have to make and the steps that you probably want to think through in any search.
Thank you so much. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there practices that may have been the norm in the past, but we're moving away from those or have moved away from those that maybe community members have seen or somebody might have in their head that you discourage?
I think the fine balance nowadays is trying to make sure you have you're attracting as many candidates as possible. And I do think more and more boards are trying to keep the information to the candidates to a smallest amount of people possible, whatever that means for that district. But I think in the past, sometimes we would do, in some places, community interviews or those type of things. You don't see as much of that anymore just because people are trying to give every reason possible for an individual to come in candidate. I don't know if you have anything else in mind, but that's been one that has come up more in recent years as the candidate pools have continued to shrink. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of information here. Thank you so much.
yeah, and so what I would suggest is, you have some chance to think about it. If you do want to move forward, then really we have to spend some time really going through these in much more detail, one at a time, all these policy level questions. And you may even want a subcommittee or a committee of the board to help frame out the schedules and do some of the work, because it is the board's work and there's no one else really, to delegate this to, as far as, we're here to help and pull together and put everything together, but they have to be your decisions, which means, you have 7 of you. So you have to spend time kind of sorting through these things and figuring out what it does come together. It takes a little time, but you do have time. That's right. And it's the most important decision. You know how important it is. I don't have to tell you that. But if I would say, if you were prepared, if you wanted to move forward with like any community forums or those type of events, even if you did those in November or December, like, you're going to be fine. You have time. You can even do them in December and you'll be fine.
Thank you so much.
November's creeping up, but because obviously if you do a forum, you want to get word out, you want people to know and all those things. So if you do it in December, you're going to have time to pull those brochures together, get a posting out, and still get somebody appointed well before, and you've got time.
Thank you so very much.
You're
That's
most
good.
welcome.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you. This is yours. This with you.
All right. Next up, we have Mr. Conway with the elementary update.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. And I want to start off, this is Dr. Huntley's first official meeting that he's here as the superintendent. Just thank him for the work. Administrative team. Things are happening, so I'm very thankful that he's here. Try to condense some things, but just a couple of updates. Last week was Fire Prevention Week, and I want to publicly thank the Lake George Fire Department for what they do for our students. They were in, we did the physically distanced presentations, and they do a tremendous job coming in, sharing information about fire safety to all of our students, K through 6. So a little plug for them. Also, our Let's Get Acquainted nights, we tried something a little different. We went with Google Meets, and the response was really positive. Staff did a job. Our families participated. I wanted to let you know it went really well. Also, as you know, we held our fall festival, and some of you were there. I was able to see that for the first time. And our PTSO, our president, Summer Steves, is absolutely amazing. The work that she and our other officers and many parents did, and our staff, putting on an event that didn't happen last year. And as you know, it's a great school community feeling to kick the year off. So it was a wonderful night. I shared at last month's board meeting our educational cabinet goals. We kind of condensed some things a little bit. One of them is that we are ensuring that all students receive the CASEL-approved Leader Me Direct lessons, K through 6. Again, that focus on whole child, spirit, mind, and body, it's very important to us, and the staff is off to a good start. The other item was ensuring that our committee structure, we have some tweaks in how we're moving forward with our our leadership committees, and then also our academic committees, how they're aligned. We're making sure that they allow us to move forward with those initiatives that we have in place, the leadership initiatives, and as well as our academics, making sure that things are a very different kind of year last year. And I just wanted to share with you that those leadership action teams, one of the things that we focus on with some of our big events is to make sure that we, quote, leaderize them, that our students are involved, that our students have voice. And we kind of narrowed the focus this year. So all of our teachers are involved on academic committees, but they're also involved, every single staff member is involved on an action team, and they have a choice in that. Megan was very involved in that process as well. One of those is our leadership assembly, end of the year celebration of leadership. So a team of staff members is busy putting that together, and you can mark your calendars. I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but on Thursday, June 16th, we are going to have a big celebration of some sort. Maybe an extended celebration that day, which we've done some of that in the past as well. But again, our teachers are coming up with ways to get creative, allow student voice, celebration. We also have a K-6 school-wide goal setting initiative where we scoreboard something. Our students, a big part of the Leader in Me is that they learn how to set goals and work towards achieving those goals. And we know that when we keep score in something, we play harder, we try harder. The simplest way to look at it is if Dr. Huntley and I are playing one-on-one basketball in the backyard and we're not keeping score, it looks a certain way. You say, hey, do you want to play to 7? It looks very different. We try a little harder. And it's the same thing with our kids. We have ways to make sure that the goals that they're shooting for can be equitable, so that our highest achieving academic students have that same opportunity as our students that struggle, and vice versa. And our staff's getting real creative with those. So those are two that were really connected to leadership and goal setting. And then others are events. They're kind of annual events that are special to us. And I'll just mention them: Flag Day, Math Night, PARP, and the Science Fair. But they will look different than they have in the past due to focus on student voice and students leading those events. So I mentioned that, and then keeping in line with leadership this year, we had a really good problem. We had well over 50 students apply to be on our Lighthouse teams, and that's just in 4th through 6th grade. Really the ideal number, you're talking about 16 students. So we have a 5th and 6th grade team, Lighthouse team, and then we have a 4th grade team as well. So Ann Mulman and I have added additional Friday session. We'll also have about 35 students signing up as greeters and another 25 or more students doing morning announcements. So in addition to those Lighthouse teams, which again, we don't know what they're going to do. They began the brainstorming process. They start to settle on things that they would like to achieve for their school and figure out how to make that happen. I don't know what I'm sure at the end of the year we'll be able to celebrate whatever that is or whatever those things are. But also, in addition to those school-wide roles, classrooms are firming up their leadership opportunities within the classroom for all of our students. Last item is that on October 27th, we have a coach that works with us from the Leader in Me, and we had one fellow who, Dewey. Gary worked with us for a number of years, but we have someone new now, Sharon Chapman, and she'll be visiting us on the 27th, really just going through the building and observing the things that we have in place and offering some suggestions for us, things to take a different look at with our leadership program. That's all I've got. Any questions? It is.
You've
There's a
got a lot going on. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for all you're doing.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. All right, next up, Mr. Kokoza with the high school report.
One-on-one basketball is competitive up to 7 unless you're playing me. So just as busy, we had our open house for parents in person the last week of September, and parents were very pleased to be back in the building. Our fall athletics is coming to a very successful end as we end the fall regular season and move on into our postseason. Right now at the high school, our quarantines are down to 1. So we had a pretty substantial number at the beginning of the school year. At one point, we were about 50 quarantines and as many positives over the first few weeks of school as we did all of last year. However, we've, knock on something, I believe we've crested and we're headed in the right direction, at least at the high school level, with one quarantine as we speak. Much like cabinet at the elementary school, our shared decision-making body at the high school forum has set its goals for the year. The two goals, one, we'll be looking at the dress code, which has not had a comprehensive review at the high school level in over about 25 years. So we'll be looking at that. And a more lofty goal about parent and student engagement. It was felt from our constituency at the high school, looking at creative ways to re-engage parents and students at the junior senior level. Our academic departments have focused their goal this year around academic grading. So the head of departments and departments are specifically looking at incompletes and the policy and procedures around assigning incompletes. The cast and crew of Mamma Mia is set, so please mark your dates for December 10th and 11th. Our musical will be December 10th and 11th, so that will come up very fast. This November, the high school, along with in December, the elementary school, we are looking at creative ways to have our concerts take place, which may include off-site venues. Unfortunately or fortunately, our performing groups are so large, they don't fit on the stage with COVID restrictions. So we're looking at different venues to hold both of our buildings' concerts. The alumni fundraiser was a huge success through the efforts of many people. We are very pleased with how much money they have raised. There are still 3 days left to buy your raffle tickets for the fundraiser calendar if you haven't done so already. It ends on the 15th, although the drawings continue till the 31st. And at the next board meeting, I'll be able to share with you the total figure that was raised from the Alumni Association. And then finally, the fundraising efforts of the class of 1970, the Lake George High School class of 1980, along with the Alumni Association, have begun for the front sign project. Back in August, the Board of Ed approved the donation of the front sign renovation project, and the fundraising has begun. This weekend, I'm meeting with the class of 1970 with their 50th plus one annual reunion, or reunion, I should say. And they are spearheading the fundraiser for that front sign rehab project. That's it. Questions? Mary Ann? For the concerts? Excellent question, Lynn. So we're currently looking at our high school gymnasium for perhaps one of the concerts, along with the Carriage House at the Fort William Henry. So if you haven't been in the Carriage House in a long time, this past summer it was renovated for the music festival folks, Lake George Music Festival folks. The inside is incredible for a music venue. It is larger than our gymnasium. Be able to perhaps host one of our or two of our concerts in there. Good point. Yeah, I totally forgot about that.
Oh, that's okay. I just was wondering about the Mamma Mia production that's in person this year
Yes,
that's in the auditorium.
in the auditorium. So correct. Using what Broadway musicals are bound by down in New York, our audience will be fully masked and the performers will be on the stage. However, we'll be able, because of the type of musical, to space them out. And the nature of our musicals, we have a very small pit crew. So the orchestra / band is only about 4 or 5 pieces and space them out. Unlike a larger ensemble, junior chorus or senior chorus or junior band or senior band, you have 40 to 50 pieces, and to space them out is quite complex. But at this point, barring any changes with COVID, in person, December in our auditorium.
I've got a quick question. With the dress code, do you have student involvement in looking at that?
Oh, yes. So we just set that as a goal today.
Mhm.
And our next forum meeting, in which there are 2 student council representatives who sit on that, part of that integral planning, how we're going to do this. It's going to take a while, and there'll be a series of meetings and discussions and back and forth feedback on the topic. But yes, students will be directly involved in that.
Have you had much feedback from students or parents about gender equity with dress code?
Our dress code is in need of updating specifically in regards to that topic.
Mhm.
Along with others.
Very good.
It is slanted in one direction at this point. So it was written in a different time,
Mhm.
and it's about time that we look at it and bring it 2020.
Well, thank you for
With that lens.
embarking on that
Yes.
work. Good luck with
And
the
we'll keep
student
you up to
voice
date.
there.
Yes, we'll keep you up to date along the way. And what I truly appreciate is the overarching other goal of parent and student engagement. Hopefully, we'll accomplish that through that revision dress code as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have our superintendent report with Dr. Huntley.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking the Board of Education for appointing me as your interim superintendent of schools of the Lake George Central School District. It's truly an honor, and I appreciate the confidence that you've shown in me and the support that you've shown since the very beginning. And I recognize at the very beginning that this is an active board, not a passive board, and this is a board that wants engagement by their community, by their students, by the faculty and staff, and I greatly appreciate that. That's the way a school district, a public school district, ought to be run. I also want to inform the board that, in my opinion, you have a very talented administrative group. 4 of them are here in the room today. I've been working very closely with each and every one of them, and I've gained a great deal of confidence in them. We're going to have a lot of fun this year, getting a lot of good work done. Faculty and staff, I've been meeting them on a regular basis, getting to know them a little bit better every day. I appreciate the dedication that I've seen from your faculty and staff. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with your community to the degree that I have. There's a lot more work to do there, but so far so good. And finally, you have great students. They're just wonderful. I look forward to continue meeting them. Sarah's been scheduling them into my office on almost a daily basis to get to meet a good number of students. So it's been a great start as far as I'm concerned, and things will continue to go very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for hitting the ground running and for a seamless start. It's going really well. We're very happy to have you. All right. So next up, we have our Audit and Finance Committee report with Katie Bruning.
Okay, we met on September 30th, and they're going to be brief because Scott, who presented tonight, was the bulk of our meeting and passed along a lot of the information. I'll not repeat that. Treasurer's report, August, report for August. Budget calendar for 22. And it's very similar to the other item we talked about was the budget for the back HVAC project. And Scott mentioned tonight that many the grants, the federal grants for that, and that's project. Found that the total cost is $1,102,975. And due to the increase in material cost, if you're watching the news, that all the material cost that has gone up since the beginning of the project. So the entire cost of the project won't be completely covered anymore by the federal stimulus funds. District plans to provide $100,000 through capital outlay project within the 2023 budget, and investigating options if costs go beyond. The numbers are fluid and made sure the scope is narrowed down in the project design. Last item we discussed was the Audit and Finance Committee charter. We reviewed that. We had some questions about that. Getting some answers to the questions, reviewed it, and we didn't have any suggested change. That.
Right, thanks so much, Katie. Next up, we have Rosemary Earl with the Curriculum Committee report.
Okay, the Curriculum Committee met on September 14th. Reviewed the purpose and the goals of the committee. I've included that all in notes, so you have the minutes of the meeting in front of you. We also reviewed the schedule for presenters and presentations this year for the Board of Education meeting, for the curriculum meeting throughout the year. And those are in front of you also. We talked about the discussion of the format of the, we talked about the format of the presentations, similar to the way it was last year, and the process in which department chair would get their presentation approved. In other words, sending it to the principal first, then the superintendent coming to the curriculum committee. So it was a fairly quick meeting, and anything?
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Marianne McKenzie with the policy report.
Our last policy meeting was on September 13th. I did provide highlights from that meeting at our last board meeting. The actual minutes are included in the agenda tonight. You'll notice in the minutes that our in-person policy discussion last month allowed us to resolve several loose threads from multiple policies. And as a result, we have 6 policies, all of which came before us by way of Erie 1 updates. 6 policies are being recommended to first read this evening. We also have 1 policy up for second read. It's 6213 registration and professional learning, which we touched on last month as well. I can also provide a progress update on our board level ad hoc DEI committee. Since we met last month, an invitation went out to district stakeholders inviting to participate in the committee. To date, we have a nice, healthy response. I think interested parties who have contacted Sarah. That's great. Meanwhile, Superintendent Huntley is helping us to connect to resources who have DEI expertise, specifically Common Thread through ASDA. And we're hoping to have a consultation with them to help us shore up the details around the charge to the committee and to help us determine configuration of the committee as well. And once that happens, we should be ready to formalize committee membership and provide the committee charge. That's where we're at right now, I think. So that's a really good question. And I think at this point, we haven't spoken to expertise, the experts in the field. I think ideally, it would be great if everybody who is interested in participating, participate. But I would like to talk to the people as to get a sense of what would be an idea to do what we'd like to do. So that is to be determined at this. But I am really happy to see how interested people have expressed interest. So that's like a real.
Thanks, Mary Ann. All right, up next, we have Lynn Durway.
Allocation.
I don't have a question, Lynn. I just wanted to say I really appreciate these slides. They're so clear, and it's just a set. It was very helpful.
Lynn, thank you so much. And Lynn King, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. We had a board development meeting on Friday. In such short order, we didn't have time for minutes, but I wondered if you wanted to speak to a couple of the topics.
Talked a bit about so potential retreat on the 26th, but I have talked to firm that up good meeting. Nice to have the opportunity to.
All right, so we're going to move on now from reports on to public comment. Public comment. Do we have anybody here for public comment? I do see Mario out in the audience, and I meant to say when the audit and finance report came out, thank you for being a community member present at our audit and finance meeting. That's awesome. All right, no other public comments. We're going to move on, and now we go to the school business consent agenda.
I recommend that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda item of the Lake George Central School District. Consent agenda items A through K.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion is carried. Next up, we have the faculty staff resignation consent agenda.
I recommend that the Board of Education approve the faculty staff consent agenda items A through D.
Second?
A and B. Okay.
Isn't that what I
So-
said?
Not sure. A and B, we've got that clear, and
So
we have
moved.
Mary Ann.
Say that.
Do we have a second? Okay, excellent. And all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. I would just like to thank Matt Butler and Susan Martino for their service to Lake George. Next is the faculty staff consent agenda.
I'm sorry. Now I know where we are.
It's okay.
I told Sarah this is first time that I've used board docs, so it's a little different. I'll get it next time.
You're making me feel real.
I recommend the Board of Education approve the consent agenda for faculty and staff items A through D.
Approval.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, so this next section is for board education comments and discussion. Board members, do you have any topics you'd like to bring to the table?
Yes, topic. So as you guys probably saw in your emails, I sent over to you voting on at the next delegate meeting, which is going to be on the 18th at 4 p.m. So if you get a chance, I'd like you to look through proposals and take a look at what's being put forth so that I represent all of us, not just me voting alone here. And then there's one resolution I want you to particularly look at because I read through most of them, and not surprisingly, there's a lot about open meetings law, allowing people to join meetings virtually, what that should look like, and they want to really make it more open and make it more easier for board members to be able to join virtually, especially given the circumstances that we have before us. But there is one, Resolution 3. This is a resolution that proposes that students be tested not on their chronological age, but on basically how they're presenting their developmental, how they put it, their developmental age. So this would require students to be assessed and categorized in a developmental age group. Just from my past experience, this can be very subjective. There's a lot of variety of socio-emotional issues that could present, and a child could be struggling academically due to a variety of reasons. And if we start this is my feeling, that if we start categorizing students in this way, it's going to be very costly. It's going to be, I think, very confusing, having a variety of testing levels. It'll be very difficult to see where we're at in regards to each student's education level, how they're progressing in school. They could be categorized incorrectly, and we're not really pushing them or judging. They should be based on where they're how they're progressing. So I just have questions about that. I have concerns about that, so I wanted to bring that to your attention. So if you guys can look
Melissa, do
through
you
that.
remember?
That
District.
I have it in front of me right now. That one is the NISBA Board of Directors. Yeah. Yeah.
Resolution.
So I just have questions and
Interesting.
concerns about that one, so.
I can't
a look.
imagine developing parameters to accurately.
That's-
And then special ed department, I just can't. even
There's
imagine.
so much. I mean, there's the Every Student Succeeds Act, which really encompasses those that need to be tested
Right.
differently.
Right.
But now we're adding another layer. I do have concerns about how that will be. So
Imagine
a lot of them, like I said, you'll read through them and it'll be common sense ones. There's some amendments at the end where people kind of put in last minute, school districts amended resolutions, which are a little bit interesting. I don't know how else to put it. But yeah, just take a look, guys, and any feedback that you have, please give to me so we can have it.
Melissa, thanks so much for taking the lead on that. Absolutely. I've got one thing. Some of you may have been paying attention to the news, and we have a neighboring school district that has been embroiled in a great deal of controversy over their school image and mascot and name. And there are some parallels to what Cambridge went through and what Lake George has really talked about for over the last 10 years since the Education Commissioner put out recommendations for districts to look at this topic and think about it. And most recently, I think it was right before the pandemic hit, we had some conversations around what is our educational responsibility to this topic, to this controversy. Given the commissioner's very hard ruling on what happened with Cambridge, I'd strongly recommend to our board to consider some action at our next board meeting. And I'd like to, at the next board meeting, put forth a motion. And this is how I like to frame it, because I find a lot of the controversy around this issue has to do with people feeling like their identity, their spirit, their connection to the history of the school and all of that is being canceled in some way. And I don't want that to happen. I think that there's a great deal of pride that should continue to be celebrated about Lake George Warriors and any imagery that folks have associated in the past. And so my recommendation for the board to think about between now and next month is really to designate our warrior head as a heritage image. And in doing so, charge the district to decide when it's appropriate to use that image, because it is part of our history, it's part of our past. It's something that's been used, and it's used in many different ways. And I don't think that we need to authoritatively come down and dictate at this point, but I think it's very clear from our commissioner the direction we're going with this. I think that along with that, we can task the district with educating students and community around all the perspectives that folks have when it comes to Native American imagery. Do we have
Are
any?
you going to be pursuing strength?
Okay, could do. Sure, that's a good idea. Any other thoughts or ideas?
Are in.
To designate
Or
it.
to designate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would that, the school district still mean? Or is that, am I getting too?
Right, I don't have any, yeah, I haven't tackled that piece at all, but certainly I think dialogue and education around, our own identity as a school will evolve from this piece. And hopefully, and it has, there's actually a great deal of history about all the different images and names that Lake George has adopted over the years. And so this is just a sign of the times, I think. But I do think it's very important in our community that nobody feels canceled, that nobody feels that they're shamed for their identity and their spirit that is in goodwill. And I think we should be able to continue to celebrate that in some way that's appropriate. Okay, go ahead, Lynn.
Changing the topic. I just want to remind the board, school boards is having the first meeting for commissioner is our, she will be 6:30. To start earlier, student entertainment. Also, more important, this is our 5th year. And at-risk students and Sarah, did you send? So if there's something that you want to contribute, but you're Sarah's office, sure that it gets. And in case you don't know, materials that we social work districts, they have a and together like shortly after we have this meeting. So all stuff is taken to that meeting, and so all of the districts in our.
Thanks, Lynn.
I just wanted to mention to the board, I attended the elementary school family festival. And it was just so nice to see the children playing games and having a great time. And also the high school students who were helping the younger students. And it was just really good to see that again. And I know that we're all, we talk about policy and all this at our level, but what it's all about is the kids, and they're back in action. And actually, Jim got dunked in the dunking booth, so that was really good. Poor guy got all wet. But anyway, so I just wanted to report to you that I observed them in action, and see.
Thanks, Rosemary. Anybody else? All right, we've come to our second portion of public comment. So any comments right up here? Come on up. And thank you for waiting so patiently through this whole meeting.
You're welcome. Just one quick question, maybe actually a favor. When you're speaking about certain programs or funding, acronyms that nobody knows what ASDA or a NISBA is or an Eagle One, if maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more.
That is a fantastic, fantastic comment and suggestion to us, because that was a topic when we had many new board members, and then we've gotten away from it as we've gotten familiar with those, and we forget sometimes that other people
It's my learning
aren't.
curve as well, but
I really appreciate it.
great.
Yeah, we will absolutely do that. Thanks. Anybody else? Okay, so we have a proposed executive session, and I just wanted to say that we do anticipate coming back into regular session briefly after our executive session to vote on a personnel item that we need to discuss in executive session, just letting everybody know that. So we'll go into executive session for whatever amount of time it takes, and then we're going to come out very briefly and take care of that business and then move on, letting folks know that. You want to go ahead and make the recommendation? You want me to just go ahead? Okay. Okay. Yep. So we'll just go ahead and make a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing employment history of a particular individual, bargaining negotiations, and a proposed litigation.
So moved.
All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Off we go to executive session.